Hi, my name is Vanessa and welcome to a video where I talk about whatever I want with no plan. So I wanted to discuss just a couple of books that I've read recently that I just haven't had the opportunity yet in a video to talk about them in depth, and also just some other things I've been thinking about, mostly book-wise recently. And let me preface by saying this, all the books I talk about today, spoilers ahead, I wanted to just feel like I'm an internal monologue, stream of consciousness, what I thought about this and points that stood out to me. And I will be spoiling a lot about the books I'm gonna talk about. Let's just go. Let's just see what comes out of my mouth. I think I want to start with, I started the Winter Night trilogy this year. I read The Bear and the Nightingale months and months and months ago, and I really liked it. It's just that I kind of put off reading it till now because I liked it and I feel like I read it at the right time. I read it during winter time. If you don't know, it's a Russian winter mythology folktale fae story taking place in medieval Russia. So I read it in the perfect time in winter time, and then I put off reading the second one because I felt like I really liked it. I just wasn't so certain about the pace of it. I just kind of felt a little disconnected to the characters, except, and this is I think a very unpopular opinion, except for Constantine. And not because I think Constantine's a good guy. So if you don't know, in the Winter Night trilogy, basically our main character, whose name is Vasya, she has the ability to see fae, essentially. And this is in a medieval era of Russia where the papacy, not the papacy, but well yes, Catholicism is huge. They are basically super anti anything pagan, and because of that, a lot of these mythological or these fae that do exist in the real world cannot be seen by anyone, and basically are almost dying out is the kind of vibe that you get. And there's this impending fae war that's on the horizon in the wintertime. Anyway, Vasya can see these fae, and her grandmother could see fae as well. It's kind of genetics, I guess, and Vasya is this middle daughter of this he's a lord of a region or something, not a very big region, but they're wealthy, and her mom dies during childbirth and is Vasya needs to survive, I need to die, take care of Vasya. Anyways, he gets remarried to this woman who is a religious fanatic and is we are not talking about fae in my house. I will have none of that devil nonsense, basically. And she hates Vasya, and she's very paranoid. So that's her thing. She's so paranoid, and she thinks that it's Vasya's fault that she can also see the fae. So she can see the domovoids is what it's called, and she thinks that these are just demons and ghosts haunting her, and it's all Vasya's fault. So they kind of have this ongoing kind of beef. Constantine is this really revered priest. I think he comes from, am I not mistaken, I think that he might be usually stationed in Moscow, but he comes to their region and he starts kind of infiltrating there. He is gorgeous, handsome, blonde, tall, beautiful man, and people listen to him. And I think that what's really interesting is his beauty goes a long way and how respected he is. And he uses that to his advantage, and he knows that. He's very attached to Vasya, but also thinks she's a witch at the same time. And he kind of developed, over the trilogy, he's obsessed with Vasya, and is in love with her, but is also terrified of her because he can also see he's being visited by the bear, who is this kind of dark style spirit, and thinks that God is talking to him, or a demon is talking. It's very hard to explain, but he thinks that's Vasya's fault. Everyone thinks that because they can see fae, it's Vasya's fault, and she's kind of just minding her business. The worst that she did to these people was be a little bit mischievous and get her dresses dirty and run around outside. You know what I mean? Constantine, as he meets her, by the way, she's very young when they meet, and he's fully an adult, and he has feelings for her. And this is by no means overlooked in the book. This is one of his very disgusting little one of his things about him that makes him so disgusting, but he's ashamed of it, which he should be, but he's very ashamed of it, and it makes him have this outright anger at Vasya, and he thinks that she is it's a demon seducing him kind of thing. And so that's sort of this ongoing struggle throughout the book. And I thought the idea of Constantine as a character in all of his scenes were just so delicious to me. He's a horrible person. He sucks so bad, but he's such a fascinating figure, I think. I do always love like a religious figure in a work of media that's like objectively working with demons basically, but thinks that like everyone else is the demon and like he's on the right side of history, but he's also like kind of seduced by our main character and is like doesn't know how to deal with that because he's supposed to be this like pure priest basically. I read the second one recently. Oh my god, this book was so good. So like I don't even know quite how to describe it. It gets a little bit more political because we go to like Moscow at some point, and then Sasha's back in the picture. Sasha is now like a priest or a monk or something like that, and he's working really closely alongside his cousin, who is the prince of Moscow, I believe. At the end of book 1, Vazia is like on the run, like she like runs away. She like gets out of there. She hightails out of there. She's like living on her own for a while, and she decides to like disguise herself as a boy at some point, and she basically gets roped into Prince Damien. Is that his name? Prince Damien. I think it's Prince Damien. She gets roped into being like part of Prince Damien's like army, and she actually is like revered as like this very, like people think that she's like a savior because there's also in the background of this, there's like the Tartars or whatever are like ransacking villages. They're stealing young girls and like putting them through like sex trafficking and everything like that. And at some point like she's able to find some of these girls for them, and so she's kind of becomes like this respected figure, and they don't know her real identity, but Sasha knows that it's her. And then you also get like Olya, her oldest sister. Her oldest sister has always been like very by the book, like very like let's not make trouble, like just accept the life that's given to you. And she's now married to this like super wealthy lord, I believe, or is it a prince? I'm not sure. Lord in Moscow as well. So there's also this kind of like tension between like older sister Olya and Vazia, and I found like that particular dynamic between Olya and Vazia to be very interesting. I love a sister dynamic. And we also get Constantine back because he's also kind of like in the ear of Damien at the same time, and then like Sasha is having to cover for Vazia even though she's lying about her identity, and he's supposed to be this like good priest, you know, this good Catholic, like never lies, trustworthy figure. And what was fun about this also is like Morozko, who shows up in book 1 and is an important character. I've just neglected to talk about him so far. I do like him though. He is the god of death basically, and he only exists like wintertime, so he's kind of like, he reminds me a lot of I Love Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. This is very that, and it's because it's based on the same mythology, but he is very the white prince or whatever from Spinning Silver. And but what he does is he shows up when people are about to die and kind of like is a Grim Reaper type figure. And there's this wonderful trope that happens, which I love when we have a character whose romantic interest is death itself, because there's like this moment that happens where basically, spoiler, Olya is in childbirth. She was pregnant at the beginning of the book, and she is like losing blood, like she's gonna die, and then like Morozko and Vasya for some reason like weren't speaking, or like they hadn't seen each other in a long time, which is delicious. He shows up, she sees him in the corner of the like the bathhouse that she's like giving birth in, or the steam house or whatever, and she's like, no, why are you here now of all the times to show up? Like you can't show up. Then they're kind of like in this like limbo space, and she's like pleading for her sister's life. She's like, you can't take her. And then Morozko's like, look, all I know is this baby can die or Olya can die. Which one is it gonna be? And Olya's like there kind of, she's like half between life and death, and Vazia is like able to kind of be in that space with Morozko like fully because of reasons, I don't know, she's magical. And Vazia makes the decision for Olya that like she wants Olya to live, like selfishly. She's like, that's my older sister, she's living, I don't even know that baby, I've never met that man a day in my life. Which was like, this was such a maddening scene where like she's pleading for her life to this man who she's kind of like developed this relationship with, and I find that so juicy and so gut-wrenching when we have like a romantic lead who's like death itself, and then you have the main character who has to like plead with the romantic lead to like not do like what his existence denotes that he does. Like he has to take people in death, and she's begging for the life of one of her loved ones to this man. Like it was so, that scene was so good. So I really enjoyed the second one. I give it 4.5 stars. Like that's how it felt in my spirit. And I think that I've come to realize about myself is that I'm a Russian mythology girl, because every book I read that has like Russian mythology in it, I eat it up. And I read it in summer, I read it in fall, even though it all feels very wintry. So I recommend reading that one in the winter time if you're gonna start that series. But I had a really good time, and I'm hoping that there's more Constantine. There's ought to be next book, but loved that. So I just wanted to tell someone about that. But next book I read was The Story of Your Life and Others by Ted Chiang. And this was something that I think I got recommended it by Leonie, like on YouTube maybe a year or two ago, and I've always just saved it and said that I'd get around to reading it, and I finally did read it. And this was so interesting because I've never seen Arrival, but I'm pretty sure that this is the collection of speculative fiction short stories that Arrival is based on, which is genius. I will say, like, one thing about this is I'm a little bit too, I like science fiction, especially science fiction movies. I find it very hard to visualize in my head when I'm like reading or listening to a science fiction book though. I just feel like my brain doesn't have the correct inputs for some science fiction settings and language for me to like not have a visual of it. So I was struggling with that a bit. I do think that this is something where, like, if you're a math kind of geek or you love science and biology and everything like that, this would really tickle you. And linguistics, of course, with Arrival, so that was very, very interesting, especially with the story about these, you know, aliens that come to Earth and they're trying to figure out how do you communicate with a species whose like version of language is completely different than anything we've ever seen on Earth. Like, how do you apply linguistic theory to that interaction? And they have to spend, and they still don't know why these aliens are here. They just feel like they're here to be like observed by them. There was like this moment where basically they have a writing system, but it's the sort of thing where like their writing system kind of looks like a bunch of runes like drawn on top of each other, and like each one of those is like its own concept, kind of like characters. She was trying to figure out like if they speak, because we speak in like consecutive kind of sentences because we think like linearly, like there's the past, the now, and the future, and then for them they're able to see the past, the present, and the future all at once. So she was getting to understand their written language, because when you're looking at words on a paper, like if you're looking at a piece of paper, all of the words are there, and as humans we read it sentence by sentence, but like for this species, they're able to like look at the piece of paper and understand the entire concept at that glance, kind of, because their brains work by like seeing time as like a ribbon or like a loop rather than being reserved to like the future. Like, I have no memory of the future at all because I've never done it before, and I have very blurry memory of the past the further I get through it. Whereas like as our main character is learning how to communicate with them in this way, she starts being able to like peripherally see the future, like in the way that you think about the past and like try to recall a memory from when you were 9 years old, you know? She's able to recall a memory from like her future, like not with extreme clarity, but just like it's kind of unlocking for her. That was like very, very fascinating. I really enjoyed that, even though I didn't quite, like, I say this in every video. I feel like I say in every video, oh, I didn't understand. I'm like, oh, I had a hard time understanding this, and it makes me seem like I'm just dumb, but I feel like I kind of like books that challenge me in a way, and this was definitely a challenging one, but the concepts were just really thrilling. And I especially want to talk about the last short story in this, which was about this world where, like, imagine Christian mythology, but it's like real, like archangels like come out of the sky and like present themselves to humanity and everything like that. And like, what would that actually like look like in real life if like we had angel sightings and like the existence of heaven and hell was like a real thing? There's like this man, and he lost his wife because archangel like Michael, I think it was, like came out of the sky, and whenever there's an angel sighting, like these things are like big balls of fire, or they have like enormous wings that, like, if I'm recalling correctly, that like can cause like shrapnel to fall, and like people get into car accidents, and like his wife just was one of these casualties. And every time a angel is seen, there's like a casualty report, as if it's like a natural disaster, because that's just like how bright like heaven's light is and how big of a distraction this like sighting is, that people die every single time. And then some people like get like cancer is healed, or they're suddenly able to walk again. And then other people, like, they see they're in the presence of an angel and now they become disabled, or they are diagnosed with cancer, or something like bad happens. And it's like people trying to find their way around, like, how do I cope with this idea of like, why was this person next to me healed at the same sighting I was at, but I was not healed, kind of concepts that do come up in Christianity in general anyway, or just religion in general. And there's actually like support groups for people who have survived or have relatives who have survived these angel sightings. So our main character goes to these support groups because he lost his wife, and all he knows is like, I hate God. Like I lost my wife. I'm resentful of God for this thing that we experienced, and like, I don't even care about going to hell. It doesn't even seem that different from like here. Like, it doesn't even seem like it'd be that bad. Like, the thing that I really hate about it is the idea that like, I know my wife went to heaven because I saw her ascend to heaven. So he knows that his wife is in heaven, and his whole dilemma is like, I can't get into heaven if I selfishly only care about going to heaven so that I can see my wife again. Like, I don't have an authentic, real love for God. Like, I just want to see my wife, and I'm actually like resentful of God for taking her. He's trying to find a way into heaven around that, and so he comes to this conclusion where like, there's this one chance that you get where you're able to kind of, if you're able to see like heaven's light or something like that, like the moment that an angel breaches through Earth's atmosphere from heaven, if you can kind of like get a peek of, or like going in or out, you can kind of get a peek of heaven itself, and half the people who see it go, oops, sorry, my light died. But half the people who do see it are able to like get into heaven whether they are like a godly person or not, and the other half just die and go to hell. Basically, if you show up to one of these events to like watch for this like heaven's light or whatever opening, you 100% will die, people say, because it basically like zaps your brain, but people show up because they want that chance to go to heaven, whether they're worthy of it or not, and that's kind of your one chance. So it's kind of like a Storm Chasers sort of like moment. Like, they have like food vendors and like announcers and like campsites and radios, and they have like emergency vehicles on hand because they know like most of these people are just about to like, they're out of here, and that was just really interesting. It was really interesting to see like that concept, like what would that look like in real life, like apply that to like a real world event, and what would the stage be for that, and like what would the fallout be for that, and the consequences of that. And it's like very interesting to see what people like angel sighting would look like in like a modern day. Like, it would be an event. And then simultaneously there's also this other story about this girl who is born with a deformity where she kind of just like doesn't have legs. Like, that was how she was formed, like in the womb. And so she lived her whole life without being able to walk, like always being in a wheelchair, and she had no problem with this at all. And other people would be like, oh, you must be so jealous of people who can have legs and walk. And she'd be like, no, I don't really care, because like I know that like this is what God wants for me, and like I'm in his image. And she's super, super religious, and she's like a very famous like religious motivator, kind of. Like, she goes to like high schools and goes to these events, and she gives talks about like God. One day there's a sighting that she's at, and she sees an angel, and her legs have grown. Like, suddenly she can walk, and she is like, has legs now. And people are like, how do you relate to me anymore? Because you're saying like God like gave me this disability for me to like live like a normal person, and like you know, it doesn't affect how I view myself, and like it's not a negative thing, it's just like a different way of being. And then now suddenly you're like blessed with having legs, and now you're trying to relate to me. Like, it's like this really interesting dynamic of like, she kind of loses her identity in that, and she's like trying to cope with like, what is the plan for me? Like, what is the idea here? Like, I was spreading God's word and it was working, and now suddenly I feel like that was just taken from me because I've been like healed, and now like people think that I don't have credibility anymore because they can't relate to me now that I'm no longer disabled. And it was sort of this idea of like the kind of general questions around like disability in like God's plan and everything like that I think people talk about still, was very interesting to see explored in this like very literal way. I think it's a really interesting story, and I really enjoyed it. That was my favorite short story. I've said before, I really like when Christian mythology is kind of explored in this like mundane supernatural way almost, and like the tangible effects of that on a real society. Like, what would that actually look like? And this book was that. Okay, moving on. This is what I really wanted to talk about. So I've been putting together a Goodreads shelf, and like I might make a video on this, and I'm so eager to make that video. It's just gonna take me forever to get through because I have a shelf full of like 15 books called Potentially Good Romance Subplot, where I have been on the hunt to find an actually good romantasy book, because I'm not a mushy-gushy person. Like, if we have a fantasy book and then we have like this love interest introduced, and by like halfway through the book they already are like in a relationship, no. And then secondly, it's like if we have a good romance but then like the fantasy side of things is really lacking, and so I feel like the only plot is the romance. For me, in my opinion, and this is just me and I know other people aren't like this, like if you like the romance like genre, I really do like that for you. I want you to keep reading romance. But for me personally, I don't think romance in of itself is like plot worthy. Like, I think it can only really hit in a subplot, and other than that, like we need like action going on. And I want people who like respect fantasy as a genre to be writing romantasy. Like, I'm very skeptical when I see like a contemporary romance writer pivot and suddenly be writing, you know, fantasy books. It just doesn't feel like I'm about to like get what I want out of it. And I'm talking about for myself. So this is all for me, you know, and if you're like me, then you might be curious in some of the books I've added to this bookshelf. I've been like scouring comments of these YouTubers whose like videos I like, and writing down like when people say like, oh, you're talking about real enemies to lovers. I have some books with like enemies to lovers, where it's like they really hate each other, and I'm like, okay, adding that to my shelf, because I love enemies to lovers. I eat it up every time, and I don't care how cliche that is getting, but it needs to be done right. And I feel like we are moving away from what it should be, right? But it's like, if we're doing fantasy, we're doing political fantasy, we're doing political intrigue, and we're doing, you know, people being hunted, like it has to be that serious to me. Like the stakes have to be high in my enemies to lovers romance. So I'm trying to gather books, not exclusively enemies to lovers, but that I think might have a good romantic subplot. So if you want to know like some of them that I've added so far, I have An Ember in the Ashes. I think this is by Saba Tahir. Everyone always talks about this, and I've just heard that the subplot is really good, and the fantasy simultaneously is also very good, so I'm eager for that. I have The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. I guess that is a enemies to lovers sapphic like romantasy story, and everyone says the same thing, like this is action packed, but at the same time, like the way that this relationship developed is just juicy, and I was like, I'm so seated for that. Another one I have, Graceling by Christian Kishore. I don't even know what it's about. My friend started it and she said like, this would be so you, and I was like, okay, I'm there. We have Grace Draven. So this was influenced by Reagan's channel. She read one of the other ones I have on here. She read Phoenix Unbound, and she just like was eating it up, and she loved it so much, and I was like, that sounds exactly like something I'd be interested in, because she was saying the same thing that I did about like romantasy just doesn't have the right amount of fantasy with the right amount of romance, or it doesn't have like, it has all the tropes but it doesn't have like the tension, and that's my problem with it as well. And she said like, she gave this 5 stars, so I was like, okay, I'm there. So we have Phoenix Unbound, which is what she read in that book, but we also have Radiant. And what I like about this is like, this is between like a fae kind of guy and like a mortal woman classic. I like it because they're two different species, which is true. It's 2 different species, and we don't acknowledge this enough. That gets acknowledged in this, and they like actually find each other unattractive. Like they think each other ugly, and I think this is like an arranged marriage situation. And why I love that and I eat that up is like, if they are outright unattracted to each other, that means that like to get to this romantic subplot, we have to do a lot of development, because a lot of times it just starts off with like, they acknowledge they're hot off the bat, you know what I mean? And then like we very easily slide into this romance subplot, because it's like, yeah, of course, like they always acknowledge how hot the other person was. This one's like, oh, she's ugly and I'm unattracted to her. And you know, they gotta work for it then in that case. So I was really looking forward to that one. And the reason why I made this was because I finished Jasad Heir. I said in my summer TBR I was gonna read the Jasad Heir this summer, and I did it. And I did it. And you know what? I loved it. I'm a Jasad Heir defender. But I wanted to talk about it because I think this being a debut novel, it doesn't come without its faults, but I'm so seated for the sequel that I can't even get out of my chair to go downstairs and grab a snack. That's how seated I am. Basically, it's about this girl, Sylvia, and she is the heir of this kingdom that no longer exists, because when she was young it was pillaged and everyone was killed, and then they were like, the people in her kingdom had like more magic from like these gods exist in each of the kingdoms. They are now like underground in a tomb because they had to restrict the god for the Jasad kingdom because he was like basically like magic mad. Politically there was some tension, and they think like Jasad in general, the Jasad monarchy had gone power mad and they needed to be neutralized, but they went a step too far because then it kind of turns into like basically rounding up everyone who has Jasad blood, and because there's this fear of magic now, they have to be eliminated. They're given like a trial by the Nizal Empire, which is an empire that kind of existed as this like neutral, like they were meant to be kind of like almost like the cops or something. Like they're kind of like a law enforcement style like empire, or like kingdom, I guess. I don't really know how to describe it. They're not like, it's not like a prince thing. They're like a law enforcement style group of people. But no Jasadi ever like actually survives it. Like they were always deemed guilty and charged with death essentially. And what's juicy is, so Sylvia is actually alive and everyone thinks that she died as a child in this like siege that happened with all the kingdoms ganging up on Jasad, and she did not. She is existing in this like lower village of Omal. And she's just like wants to mind her business. Everyone's like, there are some resistance groups that exist of Jasadi resistance people, and they're actually kind of at war in a way, and they have heard rumors that she's alive, and they both like want a piece of her. And she's like, I don't owe my life to these people. She's like, I only lived there until I was like, I don't know, 8 years old, and like I don't even want to think about it anymore. I just want to survive. I want to save my own skin. And this is after she had survived kind of in this like enchanted forest area. Like there's this very dangerous forest that exists between all of the kingdoms that she lived in with one other surviving Jasadi who was kind of like I want to say like a war commander kind of style person, and she was like awful to her, just kind of abused her to the point of oblivion, but she is very like well equipped to handle herself now. So she's kind of in this weird spot with herself where she's like, I don't want this responsibility of being the surviving heir who could like bring Jasad back. Like I just want to be a girl kind of deal, you know, like one of those ones. Maybe I just haven't read like a very solid like romantasy style book in a long time, but I did really enjoy this, and I was gripped by the plot. I saw a lot of people saying that it was kind of boring. I did not feel that way. I actually was like, at what point does this get boring? Because this is not boring at all. My biggest criticism of it is that it does have weird pacing where like you can tell that Act 1 and Act 3 were written at like totally different points in time, because Act 1's pacing is like, it makes a lot of sense, and then there's like these trials that we're supposed to get to, and then that happens at a weird time. Anyways, whatever. So the trials though, let me talk about that first. We meet Arin, who is the commander of the Nizal Empire. So he's like the son of the man who wiped out her family, essentially. And he finds out that she's a Jasadi, and he, of course, they have to be in like proximity with each other. So he's like, I want you to be my champion for the Awalin, which is like these trials that happen every year between all of the kingdoms. And like, he's like, if you survive, like basically, no one will ever find out that you're a Jasadi. I'll make sure you never die. You'll have protection your whole life. But you need to win this. And it was like for some like political reason. I don't even remember what the reason was, because it was kind of just a catalyst for this whole situation. I will say a lot of like the writing style of this, I really did like it. I think that like, I actually highlighted a lot of lines where I was like, wow, that was like really, that went really hard. I'm not saying by any means that that's like the most groundbreaking writing, but it was like, okay, for like a romantasy, this is like kind of hitting a lot, like this writing style. Anyway, so back to what I was saying about like these games though, because that's kind of like at the center of this, and like why Arin and Sylvia are together in the first place. And she's lying to him that she is actually like a Jasad heir. He just knows that she's Jasadi, and that's all he knows. And he wants her to use her powers to win the Awalin trials and everything like that. The trials are like, there's 3 trials, and we each go to like a different empire. There's a banquet, and then there's the trial, which it's fun. I love that. I love when we do trials and everything like that. But each trial literally only takes a chapter. And I was thinking the whole time where I was like, this could have been all of book 2. Like this could have been a trilogy. This is meant to be a duology, but like these trials could have been all of book 2. We could have made this even more slow burn. I know people didn't like how slow burn it is, but you're wrong, and it was great. This could have been even more slow burn, done the trials over the entire course of book 2 and really like made that really intense, because it just like pacing wise was weird. Like we started out kind of slow and very like atmospheric, and the slow build up and really understanding like this kind of inner turmoil that Sylvia's going through with like my devotion to my people versus like I just want to save my own butt kind of deal. And I did like that part of it. And then all of a sudden we're zooming through the trials. Then the ending is also quite rushed. And I did hear that this author actually took like a year-long break from writing the story, kind of in the middle of it. And I do think that that shows. So my criticism with it isn't so much with the book itself, because I think the ideas are great. I love this world that we're in. I think that I love the inspirations for this. Romantic subplot, 8. I think that it could be greatly improved by like proper editing. I just think that the editing is the problem here. So because this is a debut though, and because that it did get a lot of press, I'm really excited for book 2, because I think that it will probably have eyes on the editing a little bit more, since that was like the -- kind of critique I saw of it, is like, okay, this was great, I just feel like we needed to edit it more. And speaking of editing, there was also moments where like she was like, there at one point I remember she was on the back of this horse, like behind Irene, right? And then in the next paragraph, she's standing face to face with him, like standing up face to face with him. And we never discussed like when we got off the horse and like stood face to face. And stuff like that would happen a lot, where we'd be in one room, next like paragraph would be in a whole other room, which like I would have to stop myself and reread every single time, because it made me feel like I was missing something. It wasn't like essential to the plot, but it's stuff like that that does kind of like, you know, bog the story down in a way. Especially because I thought I was missing something the whole time, but I wasn't. And so again, that's like an editing thing. It's like the sentences were great. Like the writing style was great. It's just like, I think someone chopped something out here that they weren't supposed to chop out, or like we needed to fix this, like we needed more eyes on that. Okay, now that I've talked about all of that and I've gotten all that out of the way, I want to talk about this romantic subplot, because I was giggling in my bed when I was reading this. So, oh my god, again, enemies to enemies to enemies to lovers, right? Like it's like serious business enemies with like a very nuanced, highly problematic actually beginning. Okay, so Irene's like characterization, and this is a type of like bookman that I really love. He's like so high strung, right? This reminds me a lot of like, I was just talking about Naomi Novik. Like I loved Uprooted for this. Like the dragon is like high strung and is like no nonsense and is like very proper, and that's how Irene is. Like he looks like he like never smiles kind of deal. She is like the complete opposite. She's just like a kind of like a caged beast type of girl. Like she just wants out of here and she'll do anything to do that. And he's like super calculated, and it's very interesting to see him very slowly. Like this author is so good at having these very little moments of like breakthroughs for Irene, besides it just going from like, oh, he was this way 1 minute and then suddenly he's this way this minute. I personally didn't feel like it was like that, because we had these tiny snapshot moments, which I ache for in romance. Like that's what I want to see in a romantasy, you know what I mean? Is like those tiny moments all kind of coming together until they have this like bond, you know what I mean? And so one of those, and I highlighted this, and this is like one of my favorite moments in the book. Irene's gaze lingered on my neck for longer than normal. When he reached forward, I cringed, tightening my grip on the dagger. I half expected him to close his hands around my throat. Instead, what he did was far more baffling. He folded the back of my collar. So like, she's scared of him, first of all, because this is in the beginning of the book. She's like, why is this guy looking at my neck? Like this is like a very like tense kind of like, ooh moment. Like what is he thinking about? Like, is this like a seduction thing? And then it turns out he's hyper fixated on her collar was like propped up, and like he just turned it down. And like even in that moment, he couldn't resist like his nature of being this like super like prudent, like meticulous person. But he also wanted to like reach out and touch her in some way, and like that's his like way of doing that. And that, it was so freaking good. I loved that sort of thing, and there's just a lot of moments like that throughout the book. There's also this really interesting like description of their romance, which I did really like in this context. So since they're in this like proximity with each other, Sylvia addresses a lot in her internal monologue, like, why do I care so much about what he thinks of me? Like, why do I want him to pay attention to me so much? This is when she's starting to like have feelings for him, but she's also like hates him, obviously, because she has good reason to. And one thing that she talks about is like, I think I want to control him. Like, I think I want him to like fall for me and like be attracted to me. And why I'm kind of thinking of him in this romantic way is not because I'm really falling for him. It's more like to break down this rigid, strong, like no nonsense man and make him kind of fall for me and like break down in that way is like almost me getting the power. Like I would have the upper hands. And I actually think that's a really interesting way to phrase her attraction to him in a way that it actually like makes sense to me. Like that sort of like psychology, like that happening. I get it. Like I got it. I do wish that there was like more elaboration on that, but I was like, when I read that, I was like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, like I can kind of see being in that situation wanting to feel this power, and it doesn't hurt that he's actually like objectively really hot. Another criticism though is that the magic system in this doesn't make that much sense. Like magic exists, but I don't know why, I don't know how, and I don't know what it does. Magic is just magic. And it's one of those books where it's like people have magic and the magic just does magic. You know what I mean? Like they could do anything with it, I guess, because it's like not elaborated on. So one of the things that like I'm hoping in book 2 we get is like a more streamlined idea of what the magic is. As I do think that this author respects fantasy, and so like if we actually like had a real magic system, that would just take it to the next level, because everything else is, I thought, like fantasy wise was really good. And like I said, like his whole thing is that he's so like stern and tightly wound, and she's like kind of haughtily making fun of him, being like, oh, a compliment from the mighty, just like not mighty Nizal commander, like thank you so much, like I greatly appreciate it, your highness, and everything like that. And he's getting frustrated and he's like staring at her and he's like, I'm just a man, Sylvia, I'm just a man. And she keeps going and using all these honorifics and everything like that. And he goes like, I'm just a man, Sylvia. And then they kiss. Because he's just a man for her. Like he's just a man, like he's not, like she broke him down. Oh my god, that scene was so good. And the ending was pretty climactic. So it was rushed, but it was very good, and I think that it left in a really interesting spot. And if you're curious, yes, they do kind of go back to being like enemies, but now it's way more complicated by their feelings for each other. And I guess we're gonna get into that to book 2. So I really enjoyed this. I'm looking out for anything this author writes from now on. I just think with the right editors looking at this, we are gonna get, like, honestly, to me, a 5-star, because this was so much fun. And I'm very excited to make that video about romantasy books. It just is gonna have to come in a little while because I have a couple other videos planned. But okay, my camera's gonna die, so this is my time to sign off. It's like God is telling me, stop talking to this camera. You should have planned this video better. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. This was really fun and very cathartic. I really feel like I just need to turn on my camera and film because I hardly have any subscribers on here, and so what do I have to lose anyway? But anyways, let me know if you've read any of those or if you have any similar suggestions. I will gladly listen to them, especially romantasy suggestions. If you're a girl like me who is a fantasy girl and like a slow burn, let me know. Anyways, okay, bye.